Uncover the latest mysteries before anyone else. By supporting our original Sherlock Holmes adventures on Patreon, you unlock early access to our stories long before their YouTube debut. Your monetary support is the secret to keeping this channel alive. The link to our Patreon is in the description below. It was upon a blustery evening in late April, the sort that heralded the onset of a relentless spring gale, that our domestic tranquillity at 221B Baker Street was rudely shattered. Holmes, ensconced in his armchair, had for some hours been engaged in a profound, if somewhat peculiar, study of the Moniteur de la Mode, a periodical one would scarcely associate with his usual intellectual pursuits. He had, with a characteristic grimace that suggested a profound, if unspoken, internal struggle, explained that a subtle point regarding the cut of a gentleman's morning coat in 1888 was somehow crucial to a pending investigation, the details of which he had, as was his custom, kept largely to himself, allowing only a tantalizing glimpse of the complexities brewing in his prodigious mind. I, for my part, was endeavouring to pen an article on the etiology of tropical fevers, a subject far removed from the mundane anxieties of our great metropolis. I found a certain therapeutic solace in this precise scientific pursuit. That is, until a furious, almost desperate knocking upon our door heralded the arrival of the night's most harrowing distraction. Mrs. Hudson, flustered and apologetic, her kindly face etched with concern, ushered into our sitting-room a figure so utterly consumed by terror that he appeared to shrink within his very clothes. He was an elderly man, perhaps in his late 60s, with a wispy grey beard that seemed to tremble independently of his chin, and eyes that darted about like those of a cornered hare, constantly scanning the room as if expecting some unseen menace to materialize from the shadows. His coat, though of respectable broadcloth, was askew, almost ripped at one shoulder, and his hat, clutched tightly in a trembling hand, was crushed out of all recognition, a testament to some frantic recent exertion. He seemed to have run a considerable distance through the rain-swept streets, for his breath came in ragged, desperate gasps, and the damp sheen upon his brow was attributable as much to a profound internal perspiration born of fear as to the raw April downpour. "Mr. Holmes," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy, cracking with emotion. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I presume. They told me you were the only one who could help, the only one." Holmes, ever the epitome of detached observation, had laid aside his fashion journal with a sigh that suggested the gravest inconvenience, though I knew it was merely a feigned weariness. He now regarded our visitor with an unwavering, almost predatory gaze that seemed to peel back the layers of the man's discomfiture, exposing the raw nerve of his terror. "Pray be seated, my good sir," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite, his voice calm, yet resonating with an undercurrent of authority. "You are Mr. Abrahams, the pawnbroker of Leadenhall Street, if my memory serves me correctly, and you are, if I am not mistaken, in mortal terror of your life. Indeed, a terror so profound it has etched itself into every line of your face." The old man nearly fell into the chair, collapsing rather than sitting, his face blanching further at Holmes's chillingly accurate pronouncement. "Indeed, sir, mortal terror. How could you know? It is as if you peered directly into my very soul." "A rather elementary deduction, Mr. Abrahams," Holmes replied, leaning forward, his fingertips pressed together in his customary attitude of contemplation. "Your pallor," The unnatural dilation of your pupils which betray an underlying anxiety. The tremors that shake your entire frame, despite the apparent warmth of this room. And the fact that your clothing and dishevelled appearance clearly indicate you have fled something rather than merely walked from it. Furthermore, your profession is known to me, and pawnbrokers, while often the recipients of dubious articles, are rarely pursued with such a singular intensity of fear unless something truly extraordinary and undeniably sinister has transpired. Now compose yourself, take a sip of this brandy that Watson will pour for you, and tell us from the beginning what has so deeply unsettled the formidable Mr. Abrahams of Leadenhall Street. With a visible effort, Mr. Abrahams swallowed a gulp of the restorative liquid, then began his tale, punctuated by nervous glances towards the window, as if expecting some spectral assailant to materialize from the gathering gloom and driving rain, which was now beginning to lash against the pane. It was 3 weeks ago, Mr. Holmes, 3 weeks precisely. A young man, a sailor, I judged him to be, though clearly unconnected to our navy or any familiar European merchant marine, came into my shop. He was in desperate straits, clearly. Gaunt, feverish, and his clothes, though foreign and richly embroidered, were much soiled, bearing the marks of a long, arduous journey. He spoke little English, only enough to indicate he wished to sell something, anything, for passage on a vessel leaving for the East. He was desperate to leave London, to leave England, as quickly as possible. Abrahams paused, running a trembling hand over his face, as if to wipe away the memory. He produced it from a wrapped cloth, a dagger, unlike any I'd seen before in all my years of dealing with curios and oddities. Most of my stock, you understand, is the usual flotsam and jetsam of London life: watches, rings, cutlery, the occasional antique. This piece felt entirely different. It felt ancient, even then. He fumbled inside his coat, extracting a small velvet-wrapped parcel which he handled with extreme caution, as if it might bite him. With trembling fingers he unwrapped it, revealing an object that instantly commanded our attention, pulling our gaze towards its dark, gleaming form. It was indeed a dagger, possessed of a form and artistry utterly alien to European sensibilities. The blade, curved and wickedly sharp, was crafted from a dark, almost obsidian-like metal, which Holmes later identified as a superior form of Wootz steel, inlaid with intricate patterns of silver and gold that gleamed dully in the gaslight. The hilt was of ivory, intricately carved with what appeared to be serpents coiling around a stylized lotus flower, each scale and petal rendered with a terrifying precision, and its pommel was capped with a large, unset ruby, a deep, unsettling crimson that seemed to pulse with an inner malevolent light like a drop of congealed blood. "Observe, Watson," Holmes murmured, taking the dagger with a pair of surgical gloves he produced from his pocket, ensuring no trace of his own touch defiled the object. He turned it over, examining every facet with a magnifying glass, his eyes alight with intellectual curiosity. "The craftsmanship is exquisite. The metal originates from India, and the carving, yes, the particular style of the Rajput miniatures, yet with a ferocity of detail more akin to an older, more primal tradition, perhaps from the pre-Hindu Dravidian cultures. This is far more than an ornamental curio, Watson. This is an instrument of profound spiritual significance." Abrahams wrung his hands, his gaze fixed on the dagger as if it were a venomous snake. "I only gave him a few shillings for it, Mr. Holmes. It was unique, yes, but I couldn't determine its true value, and the man was so ill, so eager to be gone. He seemed desperate to be rid of it. He kept muttering something I didn't quite catch, about it being cursed or evil or hungry. I thought it merely the ramblings of a sick mind, delirious with fever." "And since then?" Holmes prompted, his eyes still fixed upon the dagger, as if extracting its history directly from its form. "Since then, Mr. Holmes, my life has been a living nightmare. At first it was small things, shadows moving at the edge of my vision when no one was there, just out of focus. Whispers in the dead of night, sounds like foreign tongues just outside my door, chilling me to the bone, though I could never make out the words. Then, 2 weeks ago, a symbol was painted in chalk on my shop door, a coiled serpent devouring its own tail, resembling the one on the dagger's hilt, though cruder, more hurried. I washed it off, but the next morning it was there again, bolder, darker. The police, when I called them, merely scoffed, said it was likely some hooligans playing a cruel joke. He shuddered violently. Last Tuesday it escalated. I was closing up the shop, pulling down the shutters, when I heard distinct footsteps behind me in the alley, too light for a policeman, too deliberate for a casual passer-by. I spun around, my heart hammering, and there were 2 men, dark-skinned, their faces almost entirely obscured by scarves and the shadows of the alley. They remained completely silent, making no attempt to rob or approach me. One of them simply pointed at me, then at my shop, and made a chilling, slow, cutting motion across his throat with his finger. They melted back into the deeper shadows before I could cry out, as silently as ghosts. I tell you, Mr. Holmes, they moved like phantoms, their eyes burning with a cold, terrifying resolve. "And yesterday it was worse," Abrahams continued, his voice barely a whisper, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "I received this." He produced a small, folded piece of parchment from his inner pocket, handling it as if it were contaminated. It was thin, almost translucent, and bore a single elegant symbol drawn in dark, shimmering ink. The same coiled serpent, returning this time far more refined, more menacing, radiating an almost palpable threat. Below it, in precise, if somewhat stilted English script, were the words, "Return that which is yours. The eye of Kali watches. Thy days are numbered. The hunger will be satisfied." Holmes took the parchment, examining it with the same intense scrutiny he had given the dagger. "The ink is Indian. A particular vegetable dye, I fancy, mixed with something else, perhaps even blood, for its dark intensity. And the script, while English, has certain calligraphic characteristics that suggest it was penned by one accustomed to a different alphabet, perhaps Urdu or Hindi, the letter forms betraying an alien hand. And the symbol Watson— he held it up for my inspection, its ominous design chilling me to the bone— is unmistakably that of a specific ancient sect of Thuggee, possessing a far older, perhaps even pre-Hindu origin, devoted to the goddess Kali. A branch, I surmise, that reveres the serpent as a symbol of both destruction and rebirth, a manifestation of Kali's primal power. I felt a genuine chill despite the warmth of the room, a creeping dread that transcended mere intellectual curiosity. Thuggee, Holmes? Those barbaric murderers who strangled countless travellers in India, believed to be wiped out by the British? Precisely, Watson, though the British government believed them largely eradicated. It appears their roots run deeper, their faith more resilient, and their tendrils have reached even into the very heart of London. This dagger, Mr. Abrahams, is clearly a sacred object to them, perhaps a relic of immense power, or an instrument of a forgotten blood-soaked rite. Its loss would be an unforgivable sacrilege, a cosmic imbalance, and they would stop at nothing to recover it and to punish those who have, in their eyes, defiled it, or even merely touched it. Abrahams was now weeping silently, his shoulders shaking, the brandy doing little to quell his deep-seated terror. "What am I to do, Mr. Holmes? They will kill me. I know it. I feel their eyes upon me always, even now." "Indeed, Mr. Abrahams," Holmes said, his voice unusually grave, devoid of its usual detached amusement. "They will, and soon, I imagine. However, fear not, for the game, as they say, is afoot. This dagger must be returned to its rightful custodians, however unsavoury they may be, and the insidious threat upon your life must be extinguished, root and branch." He placed the dagger carefully back into its velvet wrapping and handed it to me. "Watson, guard this with your life. It is the key to our puzzle and the price of our client's existence. Mr. Abrahams, for tonight you will remain here under my direct protection. Mrs. Hudson will prepare a room for you, where you may find some peace, however fleeting. Tomorrow the hunt begins, and we shall descend into the underworld of London." The old man, though still trembling, seemed to draw a small, albeit fragile, measure of comfort from Holmes's resolute demeanour. As Mrs. Hudson led him away, clucking solicitously and promising a warm bed and hot tea, Holmes turned to me, a peculiar glint in his keen eyes. "A fascinating case, Watson. The clash of ancient superstitions and barbarism with the veneer of modern London civilization. These men operate far beyond the realm of common ruffians or mere thieves driven by avarice. They are driven by a fanatical devotion, their methods subtle, their resolve absolute, their patience infinite. To confront them, to understand them, we must first understand their world, however alien and terrifying it may seem." "And where do we begin, Holmes?" I asked, still rather unnerved by the thought of the resurgent thuggee in our very city, their murderous rituals perhaps continuing unnoticed. With the one place where such disparate elements of humanity, the exotic and the desperate, the holy and the profane, invariably coalesce, Watson, Holmes replied, rising and striding towards his collection of pipes, the opium dens of Limehouse. The following morning dawned, if not with cheer, then at least with a cessation of the previous night's driving rain. Holmes, after a meagre breakfast of toast and coffee, consumed with his characteristic blend of efficiency and complete disinterest in food, spent several hours poring over dusty tomes and intricate maps of London's sprawling East End, consulting arcane texts on Oriental religions, criminal fraternities, and the historical records of the British Raj's campaigns against the thuggee. He smoked incessantly, filling the room with the acrid aroma of his strongest tobacco, a veritable fog of his own creation, occasionally punctuating the silence with a grunt of discovery or a low whistle of surprise as he unearthed some obscure piece of information. "The sect is called the Kula Ka Chakra," he announced at last, without looking up from a faded engraving of a multi-armed goddess with a necklace of skulls. They are a splinter group, Watson, even from the Thuggee themselves, a subsect whose devotion is perhaps even more fervent and absolute. Their reverence for Cayley is all-encompassing, and they combine it with an esoteric cult of the serpent, symbolizing the destructive and creative forces of nature, the cycle of life and death, and the hidden knowledge of the universe. This dagger, he indicated the wrapped parcel which I had, with no small trepidation, placed carefully upon the mantelpiece, its presence a constant ominous weight, is known as the serpent's kiss. It is considered more than a simple ritualistic instrument. It is a living embodiment, imbued with a portion of Cayley's own destructive power, an instrument used in their most sacred and horrifying rites, perhaps even used to offer human sacrifices. He closed the weighty book with a decisive thud, the sound echoing ominously in the suddenly quiet room. The sailor who sold it to Abrahams must have stolen it, perhaps during a mutiny on a vessel carrying it, or a daring raid on a temple. The sickness he suffered, which Abrahams described, could well have been the curse he spoke of, a psychosomatic illness born of guilt and terror, or simply the natural consequence of his villainy, a common fever contracted in his travels. Regardless, its absence from their possession is an intolerable affront, an insult to their goddess, and they will reclaim it, cleansing its defilement with the blood of the thief and anyone else who comes into contact with it, however innocently. And Limehouse, I ventured, trying to prepare myself for the inevitable descent into that notorious quarter. Limehouse, my dear Watson, is the logical nexus for such a group. The shipping lanes from India, the vast bustling docks, the transient population of sailors, lascars and coolies. It is a veritable melting pot of the Orient and the Occident, a perfect breeding ground for such an organization to operate largely unnoticed, concealed by the very diversity of its inhabitants. They would establish a clandestine network there, undoubtedly using the ubiquitous opium dens as a cover for their more nefarious activities. Such establishments are ideal for secrecy, for the gathering of intelligence, for the planning of dark deeds, and for the anonymity required for their grim trade. They are, in essence, their temples of darkness. Holmes then began his meticulous preparations, a ritual I had witnessed many times, yet which always held a fresh fascination. He donned a seaman's coarse pea-jacket, thick and weather-beaten, a knitted cap pulled low over his brow, obscuring much of his distinctive profile, and stained his face and hands with walnut juice, giving his complexion a weathered, sun-baked hue. A 3-day growth of beard, achieved with remarkable speed by some theatrical trick, completed his astonishing transformation. He looked utterly unrecognizable, a dock worker perhaps, or a disreputable sailor himself, a man born of the docks and the sea. "You will accompany me, Watson," he said, his voice now rougher, more guttural, having already assumed the persona. "You shall be a medical man, perhaps a philanthropic yet naive doctor slumming it in the East End, or an amateur ethnologist fascinated by the darker corners of human existence. Your presence as a respectable, if somewhat eccentric gentleman, will lend me an air of innocuousness, whilst also providing a steady hand and a reliable revolver should matters escalate, as I suspect they inevitably shall." I accepted my role, though with a distinct unease. Limehouse was not a quarter of London I frequented, and its reputation for squalor, vice and danger was well earned. We hailed a hansom cab and instructed the driver to take us to the very edge of the district, Holmes insisting we walk the remaining distance, the better to immerse ourselves in the atmosphere. As we descended into the labyrinthine alleys of Limehouse, the air grew thick with a cloying miasma of coal smoke, stagnant water from the overflowing gutters, unwashed humanity, and a sickly, sweet odour that I soon identified as opium, a smell that seemed to cling to everything. The gas lamps struggled against the encroaching dusk, their feeble light casting long, distorted shadows that danced with every passing figure, making phantoms of the living. Faces, often gaunt and desperate, with eyes that held either suspicion or vacant despair, peered from doorways, quickly retreating into the gloom. The ceaseless roar of central London seemed to recede, replaced by a low hum of foreign voices, the creak of rotting timbers, the scuttle of unseen rats, and the occasional mournful cry of a ship's horn from the river, a sound that seemed to lament the very existence of this place. Holmes, with a practised slouch and a swagger that seemed entirely natural to his new persona, led me into a particularly grimy establishment identified by a faded, almost illegible sign above its door. The Serpent's Coil. The name itself, given our case, sent a fresh shiver down my spine. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive, a palpable weight of despair and lethargy. The room was shrouded in a thick, sweet-smelling smoke that stung the eyes and coated the back of the throat, making breathing difficult. Figures lay slumped on rough wooden bunks and mats, their faces pale and vacant, their eyes glazed with a narcotic stupor, opium pipes clutched loosely in their limp hands. A few Chinese men, their queues coiled around their heads, moved silently amongst them, tending to their needs, lighting pipes, or perhaps, in some cases, exploiting their addictions with cold efficiency. Holmes moved with a deceptive ease, his eyes sweeping over every detail, missing nothing. The texture of the walls, the stains on the floor, the subtle reactions of the denizens. He affected a slouch, his hands jammed into his pockets, occasionally nodding or grunting to a passing figure, a performance of remarkable verisimilitude. I, for my part, did my best to appear nonchalant, observing the scene with a feigned scholarly interest, though my hand strayed more than once to the comforting presence of the revolver I carried in my pocket. After purchasing a small measure of the potent drug, which Holmes, to my relief, merely pretended to partake of, letting it smoulder in his pipe while he observed the room through the smoke, he drew me into a corner, his voice barely audible above the low hum. "Observe, Watson," he whispered, his eyes still sharp, despite the haze. "The clientele. We see the wretched of the earth in abundance, yet you must also notice the occasional figure, better dressed, more alert, possessing an air of authority that belies their surroundings. The men who stand by the door, seemingly indolent, yet their eyes miss nothing. These are the overseers, the watchers, the silent guardians of this dark domain." He nodded subtly towards a man sitting cross-legged in a far corner, his back against the wall, almost melting into the shadows. He was thin, with sharp, intelligent features, a hawk-like nose, and an aura of quiet, almost menacing authority that radiated even through the smoke. He smoked his pipe with a deliberate slowness, his gaze occasionally sweeping the room, pausing on new arrivals. On his wrist I noticed a silver bangle, intricately engraved with a familiar symbol that now haunted my thoughts. "The serpent," I murmured, a sudden dryness in my throat. "Precisely," Holmes said. "Our target, or at least a high-ranking member of it, a local guru. He is observing, no doubt sizing up the new arrivals. Perhaps he seeks a new recruit, or perhaps he awaits a report from one of his lieutenants. Let us see if he can be engaged in a manner appropriate to our delicate mission." Holmes rose, his movements fluid and unhurried, and with an almost imperceptible signal, a specific tilt of his head, a certain angle of his pipe, managed to catch the man's eye. He then made a subtle gesture with his left hand, a peculiar twisting motion of the fingers that meant nothing to me, while holding profound significance for the man in the corner. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. Then, with a barely perceptible nod, he motioned Holmes forward with a subtle flick of his wrist. "Wait here, Watson," Holmes instructed, his voice low, melting away into the smoke-filled haze as if he were part of the shadows himself. I watched, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as he approached the man, exchanged a few whispered words, and then, to my astonishment, produced the velvet-wrapped dagger from inside his pea-jacket. The man's reaction was immediate and profound. His composure, hitherto unshakable, fractured. His eyes widened, and he recoiled slightly, a guttural exclamation escaping his lips in a foreign tongue, a sound of profound shock and reverence. Holmes, ever the master of the dramatic, then unwrapped the dagger, allowing its dark blade and crimson pommel to glint malevolently in the dim, smoky light. A ripple seemed to pass through the room. Several other figures, previously seemingly lost in their narcotic stupor, suddenly seemed to sit up, their glazed eyes snapping into focus, fixed with an unnerving intensity on the sacred object. The man in the corner, regaining his composure with a visible effort, spoke rapidly to Holmes, his words harsh and clipped, full of a fierce, questioning energy. I could not hear the exchange, but I saw Holmes nod, then re-wrap the dagger with care. The man in the corner then stood, a lean, wiry figure, surprisingly agile for his posture, and gestured towards a narrow, heavily curtained door at the back of the den. Holmes glanced back at me, a brief, reassuring flicker in his eyes, then followed the man through the doorway, disappearing into the unknown. My pulse hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. I considered abandoning my post and rushing to his aid, but Holmes's instruction had been clear. I remained, my senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat, every creak of the floorboards a harbinger of danger. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The drone of foreign voices, the bubbling of opium pipes, and the oppressive heat of the room seemed to press in on me, suffocating my breath. I imagined Holmes alone, surrounded by these fanatics, the dagger his only shield, his intellect his only weapon. Had he made a terrible miscalculation, one that would cost him his life, and Abraham's his? Just as I was about to abandon all caution and rush to his aid, the door reopened. Holmes emerged, his face grim but unharmed, his composure perfectly restored. He gave another imperceptible signal, a slight twitch of his finger, and I rose, joining him with as much nonchalance as I could muster. The man with the silver bangle watched us, his expression unreadable, as we made our way to the street, his eyes following us until we passed beyond the doorway. "What happened, Holmes? Are you well? Did they take the dagger?" I asked, my voice a frantic whisper once we were outside, the cold, damp air a welcome shock to my lungs. Holmes merely shook his head, drawing a deep, cleansing breath. "Not yet, Watson. The initial contact has been made and the first gambit played. That man is a sub-leader, a local guru, as they would call him. He recognized the serpent's kiss immediately, the shock upon his face a testament to its profound significance. I made it clear to him that the dagger was entirely off the market and would only be surrendered with strict assurances. I told him I represented a party interested in its return solely on the condition of a complete cessation of hostilities against Mr. Abrahams, alongside a guarantee of his continued safety." "And he agreed?" I pressed, still incredulous. "He listened. More importantly, he recognized my knowledge of their customs, of the sacred nature of the object. He was visibly startled by the symbol I gave him in greeting, a lesser-known gesture of deference to Kali, one easily missed by an outsider. It bought us an audience with a higher authority, which will take place tomorrow night, in a different den, a more secluded one, a private sanctum, no doubt. "A trap, Holmes?" My hand instinctively went to my pocket. "Possibly, my dear Watson. We must brave it regardless. Mr. Abraham's life, and perhaps our own, depends upon it. They are obsessed with reclaiming this dagger. They believe its continued presence outside their rights brings ill fortune upon their entire brotherhood, and indeed upon the very fabric of existence. I impressed upon the guru that I also understood the power of the British law, and that any further aggression towards Abrahams would bring the full, unyielding force of Scotland Yard, and indeed the Empire, down upon their entire network in Limehouse, dismantling it brick by brick. It was a risky bluff, certainly, but it seemed to give him pause, for even these fanatics understand the practicalities of self-preservation, however grudgingly. We returned to Baker Street, leaving the sinister allure of Limehouse behind, the rain sweeping around us like an accomplice. Abrahams, informed of the progress, was still a bundle of nerves, but seemed to cling to Holmes's every word as if they were life rafts in a tumultuous sea. Holmes spent the remainder of the evening preparing for a psychological battle, a test of wills and knowledge against a deeply ingrained fanaticism. He rehearsed his arguments, citing obscure passages from Hindu scriptures and ancient texts on tantric rituals, preparing to speak to these zealots in their own language of reverence and fear, faith and superstition. The following night, a fierce squall had at last fully descended upon London, thick with driving rain, an impenetrable watery curtain muffling sounds and lending an ethereal, sinister quality to the gas lamps, reducing them to halos of sickly light. It was the sort of night that seemed to breed villainy, obscuring the dark deeds of men from the prying eyes of the law, a perfect backdrop for our perilous undertaking. Holmes, eschewing his previous disguise, dressed in his customary tweed suit, though he carried a stout ash plant, its polished knob a reassuring weight, and I carried my trusty service revolver, its cold steel a familiar comfort, in my coat pocket. The dagger, carefully wrapped in its velvet shroud, was in my inner coat pocket, its weight a constant, unsettling reminder of the peril we faced, a palpable link to the ancient, dangerous world we were about to re-enter. We navigated the spectral streets in a hansom, the driver proceeding at a snail's pace, his lamp a feeble, struggling beacon against the swirling deluge, barely piercing the gloom. Our destination was even deeper into the heart of Limehouse, a place Holmes had pinpointed through a series of subtle inquiries and observations from the previous night's foray, a place far removed from the general thoroughfares. It was a dilapidated warehouse, its windows long since boarded up and painted black, its bricks crumbling, nestled amongst a warren of decaying jetties and abandoned warehouses, its very existence seeming to be on the verge of collapsing into the grimy tidal Thames, a forgotten relic of forgotten commerce. A single oil lamp flickered above a heavy, iron-bound door, casting a small, wavering pool of light. As we approached, it creaked open, revealing the shadowy figure of the guru from the previous night, his face impassive, unreadable in the dim light. He made no gesture of welcome, no greeting, merely inclining his head and stepping aside, allowing us passage into the darkness beyond. We entered a large cavernous space, chill and damp, permeated by the omnipresent odour of river mud, decay, and once again the sickly sweet scent of opium, though here it was mingled with the sharper, more pungent aroma of burning incense, a spiritual counterpoint to the degradation. In the centre of the vast echoing room, a circle of men sat upon woven mats, their faces dark and intense, their eyes fixed upon us with an unnerving, unwavering intensity. Some were older, their faces etched with the lines of hard living and fanaticism, their bodies lean and wiry, others younger, their expressions reflecting a fierce, unquestioning devotion, a readiness for any command. All of them seemed coiled and dangerous, like the serpent on the dagger's hilt. At the head of this grim assembly, seated upon a slightly raised dais, a simple wooden platform draped with a coarse dark cloth, was a man whose presence immediately commanded attention, radiating an almost palpable aura of power. He was older than the rest, perhaps 70 years of age, his face a roadmap of ancient wisdom and uncompromising, unyielding resolve. His eyes, though sunken deep within their sockets, burned with an unholy fire, a cold, intense flame of fanaticism. His head was shaven, save for a long grey queue that hung down his back, and around his neck hung a garland of what appeared to be dried human finger bones, a stark, barbaric symbol of his devotion to Kali, the destroyer. This, I instantly realized, was the leader, the Grand Master of this Kulakachakra sect, a man of immense spiritual and temporal power within their brotherhood. "Welcome, Sahibs," the Grand Master said, his voice surprisingly soft, yet imbued with an unmistakable resonance that filled the cavernous space, each word perfectly articulated, carrying the weight of centuries of tradition. His English was flawless, spoken with an archaic formality that suggested his education came from ancient texts rather than common parlance. "My guru informs me that you come concerning the serpent's kiss. It is a matter of profound importance to my brethren, a matter of cosmic balance and divine favour." Holmes stepped forward, his demeanour one of quiet, unwavering authority, entirely unshaken by the grim assembly or the chilling presence of the Grand Master. "Indeed, revered one, I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague Dr. Watson. We come solely as emissaries, seeking to avert further bloodshed and to right a grievous wrong that was perpetrated without true understanding of its gravity." The Grand Master's eyes glittered, reflecting the oil lamp's flame. "A grievous wrong was committed when the serpent's kiss was stolen from the temple of Kali by a defiler, an unbeliever who dared to profane its sanctity. The blood of the thief and those who harboured him must cleanse the desecration. It is the demand of the goddess. And that cleansing has already begun, has it not? Holmes countered, his voice steady, his gaze meeting the Grand Master's without flinching. He reached into his inner pocket. However, instead of producing the velvet-wrapped dagger, he withdrew a small, tarnished silver coin, engraved with a serpent, tossing it lightly onto the wooden dais, where it rang with a sharp, final clarity. The thief, the sailor known to you as Ram Das, died of a fever a fortnight past in a hospital in Plymouth. His death, by your own sacred tenets, was a judgment, a divine retribution exacted by the goddess herself. I recovered this very coin from the Plymouth Constabulary via telegraphic inquiry this afternoon. It was found clutched in the dead man's hand. As for the pawnbroker, Mr. Abrahams, he is merely an unwitting recipient of a sacred object he did not understand, a temporary vessel. The cosmic ledger is balanced. The blood debt is paid. To take his life now would be an act of indiscriminate, unnecessary violence, drawing the unwelcome and indeed crushing attention of the British authorities upon your brotherhood, and jeopardizing your very presence in this land, perhaps even leading to your utter eradication, as it once did. The Grand Master raised a gnarled hand, adorned with several rings of ancient design, silencing a low murmur that had begun to spread through the assembly. He stared intently at the silver coin gleaming on the dais, processing the undeniable physical proof. "You speak with knowledge, Sahib Holmes. You know of Ram Das. You have proven the goddess's judgment upon the defiler. Yet the sacred dagger remains in the hands of an unbeliever. The ritual cannot be performed without it. Kaylee demands its immediate return, for her hunger is great and her patience finite." "And it shall be returned, revered one," Holmes said, his voice firm, his eyes never leaving the Grand Master's. He turned to me, a subtle nod of reassurance passing between us. "Watson, the serpent's kiss, if you please." With a nervous tremor, I produced the wrapped dagger from my coat and handed it to Holmes. He unwrapped it with an almost reverent slowness, prolonging the moment, allowing the dark blade and crimson ruby to emerge into the light of the oil lamps, which seemed to intensify its malevolent, captivating glow, making it pulse with a dark energy. A low murmur, almost a gasp of awe and fierce longing, rippled through the assembled sect members. Their eyes, once hard and watchful, now burned with a mixture of awe, reverence, and fierce possessiveness, their faces transfixed by the sight of their lost relic. Holmes held the dagger aloft, its hilt pointing towards the Grand Master, its blade shimmering faintly. "The serpent's kiss," he intoned, his voice adopting a deeper, almost liturgical cadence, as if he were a priest himself, imbued with the very essence of Kali, the Great Mother, the Destroyer. "Its spirit has been restless, its power diminished by its exile from its sacred home. It yearns to return to its rightful place, to witness the dance of destruction and creation once more, to be wielded in the hands of its true children." He paused, allowing his carefully chosen words, steeped in their own mythology, to sink into the minds of the assembled fanatics. "I have brought it here, at great personal risk, with the dual purpose of returning it and ensuring that its return brings peace alongside restoration. Mr. Abrahams, though he unwittingly defiled it by holding it, has no further designs upon it. He wishes only to live in peace, burdened by fear and guilt, unencumbered by possession. He has committed no crime against your laws, only against your faith. Does the great Kali, in her infinite wisdom and terrifying majesty, truly demand the blood of an innocent pawnbroker to restore a balance already achieved through her own divine retribution? The Grand Master looked at Holmes with a gaze that seemed to pierce his very soul, delving into the deepest recesses of his intellect. He remained silent for a long moment, the air thick with tension, each second stretching into an eternity. The other sect members sat motionless, their breathing shallow, their faces a tableau of anticipation, awaiting their leader's ultimate judgment. At last the Grand Master spoke, his voice retaining its soft resonance, yet now tinged with a grudging respect. "You are a man of profound understanding, Sahib Holmes. You speak of Kali with the profound insight of one who has gazed into the abyss of her power, far exceeding the grasp of a mere Western scholar. You understand the sanctity of this blade, its ancient hunger." He reached out a hand, bypassing the dagger, to gesture towards the empty space before him on the dais. "Place it here. Let it return to its resting place." Holmes, without hesitation, placed the dagger carefully upon a small ornate pedestal that stood on the dais, a shrine prepared for its return. The Grand Master then rose, his movements slow and deliberate, imbued with ceremonial grace, and approached the dagger. He ran a reverent finger along its blade, then lifted it, holding it aloft as Holmes had done, a symbol of reclaimed power. A collective sigh, a sound of relief and fervent devotion, escaped the lips of the assembled men, their eyes alight with renewed faith. "The serpent's kiss returns to its children," the Grand Master declared, his voice ringing with renewed authority, echoing off the cavernous walls. "The defilement is ended. For your wisdom, Sahib Holmes, and for the safe return of this sacred instrument, the life of the pawnbroker Abrahams shall be spared. We are a people of honour, even in our vengeance. You have fulfilled your part of the bargain, and the cosmic balance is restored." He fixed Holmes with his burning gaze once more, a look that promised both gratitude and a chilling warning. "Be aware, Sahib. Should any further transgression occur, should any Westerner again profane our sacred objects or interfere with our chosen path, then neither the law of your land nor your considerable wisdom shall protect them. We are in your land, but we serve a higher power, and our reach is long, even across the oceans." "I understand completely, revered one," Holmes replied, bowing slightly, a gesture of respect that seemed to appease the Grand Master. "And I trust that the Kulaka Chakra will also understand that the laws of England are impartial, and those who seek to circumvent them, regardless of their faith, will be met with the full force of justice, a force that can be far more relentless than any ancient curse." The Grand Master merely smiled, a thin, knowing curve of his lips, a flicker of something ancient and dangerous in his eyes. "Such threats are for lesser men, Sahib Holmes. We have our ways, as you have seen. Tonight there is peace. You and your colleague are free to depart, with our gratitude." We did not linger. As we turned to leave, the Guru from the previous night escorted us to the heavy iron door. He paused for a moment, and I caught the flicker of something akin to respect, perhaps even awe, in his hawkish eyes. "You are a brave man, Sahib Holmes," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, "and a wise one. Few Westerners would venture so boldly into the den of the serpent, armed only with knowledge, and fewer still would emerge unharmed or with their lives. "It is merely a matter of understanding, my good sir," Holmes replied, his usual dry wit returning now that the immediate danger had passed, a subtle shift back to his familiar persona. "Sometimes the serpent, though venomous, can be reasoned with, provided one speaks its language and offers it exactly what it truly desires." We stepped out into the squall, which seemed even thicker than before, a swirling, watery curtain that swallowed the grim warehouse behind us, erasing it from view as if it had never existed. The sounds of the Thames, the distant cry of gulls, and the muffled rumble of traffic seemed a welcome symphony after the unnerving silence and oppressive atmosphere of the sect's lair, a return to the familiar, comforting chaos of London. We returned to Baker Street well past midnight, the rain still clinging to our coats like a shroud, damp and cold. Mr. Abrahams, roused by our arrival, rushed from his room, his face etched with anxiety, his eyes wide with desperate hope. "Well, Mr. Holmes, what news? Am I safe? Did they take the dagger? Is it truly over?" Holmes, lighting his pipe with a long, satisfying draw, filling the room with the familiar aroma of shag tobacco, nodded slowly. "Indeed, Mr. Abrams, the dagger has been returned to its rather zealous custodians. Your life, for the time being, is no longer in jeopardy from the Kulaka chakra. You may sleep soundly tonight, something I imagine you have not done for many weeks, perhaps even months, judging by your frayed nerves." The old man sagged with relief, a great visible burden lifting from his shoulders, transforming him from a figure of abject terror into one of profound gratitude. He stammered his thanks, tears welling in his eyes, offering Holmes payment, which my friend waved away with a dismissive gesture, a rare yet telling sign of his deeper satisfaction. "Consider it a public service, Mr. Abrahams," Holmes said, blowing a perfect plume of smoke towards the ceiling. "A reminder that many dangers remain invisible and numerous crimes circumvent the penal code. Certain offences violate the ancient laws of man's spirit against sacred traditions, and they can prove far more perilous, far more insidious than any common robbery." As Abrahams, his steps now lighter, gratefully retired to his room, Holmes settled into his armchair, a contented, almost reflective expression on his face. "A rather unique challenge, Watson, to prevent a murder by understanding the very motivations of the would-be murderers, rather than simply apprehending them and throwing them in a jail. These Kulaka chakra operate far outside the realm of ordinary criminals driven by greed or malice. Their entire worldview revolves around the absolute sanctity of their traditions and objects, their spiritual connection to the divine. To them, the theft of the serpent's kiss was a cosmic imbalance, a desecration that required a cosmic correction. Mere imprisonment would only have intensified their resolve, creating martyrs and a deeper, more pervasive threat to the peace of London. "A brilliant stroke, Holmes, securing that coin from Plymouth," I ventured, pouring us each a restorative whisky, the amber liquid glowing in the lamplight. It transformed a dangerous bluff into an unassailable, logical deduction. "Precisely, my dear fellow. I spoke to them entirely of Cayley, of their own rituals and prophecies, omitting any reference to British law, which they hold in contempt as an alien imposition. I demonstrated an understanding of their esoteric beliefs that genuinely surprised their Grand Master, winning his begrudging respect. By entering their sanctum unarmed and unafraid, I returned their sacred object while simultaneously performing, in a twisted sense, a symbolic purification. The dagger having passed through my hands, an outsider who understood its significance and honoured its power was perhaps more cleansed than if it had merely been seized by force by uncomprehending authorities. It restored their honour without requiring further blood, a blood sacrifice that would only have bred further conflict. And the sailor Ram Das, his death was highly convenient. Ah, an intriguing detail, Watson, and one that proved crucial. During my extensive research, I discovered a report from a Plymouth hospital regarding a Lascar sailor suffering from a particularly virulent tropical fever who had died a fortnight ago. The symptoms described were consistent with a severe form of malaria, and the man had been found clutching a small, leather-bound pouch containing that peculiar silver coin engraved with a serpent. It was a minor yet telling detail, indicating his connection to the sect. It gave me valuable leverage. I could assure them that Ram Das had indeed met his fate, a divine judgment for his sacrilege, and that Abraham's was merely an innocent bystander, a temporary, unwitting victim for their sacred object, wholly unconnected to the theft. Holmes chuckled, a rare, low sound of profound satisfaction. It was a delicate negotiation, Watson, walking into the lion's den, as it were, and convincing the lions that their best interests lay in sparing our client. A fascinating blend of anthropology, psychology, and plain, unadulterated nerve. He leaned back, watching the smoke from his pipe curl towards the ceiling, forming ephemeral patterns in the lamplit air. The world, Watson, is a far stranger place than our neat London streets would have us believe. Beneath the veneer of gas lamps and hansom cabs, ancient forces and exotic dangers lurk, sometimes brought to our very doorsteps by the vast, complex tides of empire. It is our duty, yours and mine, to understand them, to comprehend their peculiar logic, and to bring what small measure of order we can to the chaos that often arises from their collision. I reflected on the evening's extraordinary adventure, the eerie, suffocating squall, the squalid, dangerous dens of Limehouse, the menacing, fanatical devotion of the Thuggee sect, and Holmes's singular brilliance in navigating such treacherous, unfamiliar waters. The experience had been harrowing, certainly, yet ultimately profoundly rewarding. Abraham's, a small cog in the great machine of London commerce, could now resume his mundane life, saved from a fate far more terrible than any common robbery, thanks to the extraordinary mind of Sherlock Holmes. And I, Dr. John H. Watson, was once again left to marvel at the depths of human depravity, and the towering intellect that stood as its bulwark against the darkness. "A singular case, Holmes," I agreed, sipping my whisky, the warmth a pleasant contrast to the chill of the rain. "Truly one of the most remarkable. It quite puts one in mind of that old proverb, 'He who sups with the devil needs a long spoon.'" Holmes merely smiled, a faint, knowing expression playing on his lips, his eyes twinkling in the lamplight. "Or, in this instance, Watson," he mused, exhaling a perfect smoke ring that dissipated slowly. "A deep knowledge of their menu, and a keen appreciation of their particular palate." And with that our conversation drifted to other matters, leaving the chilling spectres of the Kulaka chakra and their sacred serpent's kiss to recede into the peculiar annals of Sherlock Holmes's unrecorded cases, a testament to the strange and dangerous tapestry of life that he and I so often explored. Want to unlock the next story early? Do not forget to check out our Patreon using the link below.